The Thak Dominion was at the height of its power when they captured him. Their banners, woven from black iron threads and shimmering blood-red silk, hung from fortress walls that had never been breached. Starships bristling with plasma cannons drifted above occupied worlds like patient predators. To the Thak, the humans were just another unruly species to subjugate, a nuisance on the edge of their growing borders. When word came that a lone human soldier had been found hiding in the rubble of a devastated outpost, the commanders barely paid it any mind. He was dragged in chains through ranks of Thak soldiers, hulking reptilian warriors clad in scale plate armor, who jeered and spat alien curses at him. His uniform was tattered, one sleeve burned away, his wrists bound tight enough to cut the skin. Yet his back was straight, his chin lifted, his eyes scanning every shadow of the massive courtyard where he was paraded like a trophy. Young warriors crowded to see him, expecting pitiful pleading or crazed shouting, as other prisoners had done before him. Instead, the human said nothing. He did not flinch when shoved to his knees before the fortress commander. He did not look away when a clawed hand tipped his head back to inspect the defiant tilt of his jaw. He only stared back, calmly, silently, as if daring them to see the flaw beneath their gilded banners. To the Dominion, he was one more prisoner to interrogate and discard, proof that their campaign to break humanity was working. But in that courtyard, under the watchful eyes of young blooded warriors eager to carve out their glory, the humans' quiet refusal to cower cracked something small and unseen among the ranks. They placed the human prisoner in a cold, stone-walled cell deep beneath the fortress, chains bolted to the floor to remind him of his powerlessness. A sputtering lamp hung overhead, casting shadows that danced across scarred stone and rusted iron. Guards rotated watch every few hours, some veterans with dulled scales and empty stares. Others young warriors still hungry for conquest and eager to see a human finally broken. At first, the guards mocked him, speaking in their guttural tongue about the Dominion's unstoppable might. The worlds burned into submission, the cities turned to ash. But the prisoner never rose to their bait. He did not shout or curse. He watched, eyes calm and unsettlingly steady, as though weighing each insult, each boast, each impatient glance. His silence was heavier than words. A few guards caught themselves hesitating under his gaze, shifting uneasily in the flickering lamplight. They noticed how the human's eyes moved, not aimlessly, but methodically, tracing cracks in the walls, counting steps between patrols, studying every movement with a quiet, unsettling intelligence. Some of the younger warriors began to wonder why such a man, so badly beaten and chained, seemed utterly without fear. In stolen whispers outside the cell, doubts took shape. How could a single prisoner hold himself so calmly if the Dominion's victory was as certain as they'd been taught? Was his defiance born of ignorance, or did he know something they did not? Even the fortress commander felt the echo of these questions ripple through the ranks, like hairline fractures spreading unseen through marble columns. The human had spoken no words to stir rebellion, yet the mere sight of him, unbowed and silent, began to erode the certainty that had long held. On rare occasions together, the guards were ordered to question the human directly, to extract information about human troop movements, encryption codes, hidden supply lines. The interrogations never went as planned. Instead of screaming or cursing, the prisoner spoke with unsettling calm, his voice low and rasped by days without proper water, yet steady enough to make even the most hardened Thak listen. "You think strength comes from fear," he told one young warrior, his gaze unwavering despite bruises darkening his skin. "But fear is cheap. It lasts only as long as you can make them tremble." The words were spoken softly, without spite, as though explaining an obvious truth to a child. Some guards dismissed his words as weakness. Others found themselves replaying them late at night, standing watch beside rusting gates while echoes of past executions haunted the halls. They began to see the Empire's banners differently, not as symbols of eternal dominance, but as cloaks to hide the Dominion's growing paranoia. The prisoner never openly called for rebellion, yet every conversation left seeds that burrowed deeper. He spoke of choices, of conscience buried under orders barked by commanders who themselves feared punishment. He asked questions no one dared answer aloud. What if the chain of obedience breaks? What happens when terror becomes familiar, and those forced to kneel remember what it feels like to stand? Word of these quiet exchanges spread among the fortress staff. Cooks, supply clerks, even scarred veterans who had seen entire cities burned for daring to resist. It dawned on some that the Dominion's vast armies were held together less by loyalty than by the threat of annihilation. And beneath that cold realization lay something far more dangerous than hatred. The first quiet
The fortress
stirring
walls
of
had
shame.
stood
Unbreached for decades, wrapped in rings of scorched earth and guarded by plasma cannons and watchful sentries. Even so, the night the attack came, it seemed to erupt from nowhere, like thunder breaking through a clear sky. Explosions rocked the outer defenses, towers split in showers of stone and molten iron, and the night air burned with the acrid bite of energy weapons discharging in desperate defense. Amid the chaos, alarms wailing, orders shouted across smoke-choked courtyards, shadows flickering under roaring flames. The human cell was discovered empty. Chains lay snapped on the stone floor, still warm from his last touch. There were no signs of forced entry, no scorched locks, no twisted hinges. Only silence, and the unsettling emptiness where he had stood, watching and waiting. Some believe human saboteurs had slipped through crumbling tunnels to free him. Others whispered darker theories, that he had walked out unchallenged. The weight of doubt he planted opening doors that should have stayed locked. A few swore they glimpsed him striding through the smoke, head high, his torn uniform fluttering like a banner of quiet defiance. The fortress commander ordered frantic searches through every passage and ruin, but the prisoner had vanished as though the flames themselves had carried him away. In the mess halls and barracks, soldiers spoke of the human not as prey, but as something more, a phantom born of their own shaken faith. The story of his escape spread far beyond the fortress walls, twisting into rumor and legend, carried on the lips of retreating soldiers and defectors alike, until even the highest echelons of the Dominion could not ignore the man they had once dismissed as nothing. In the weeks following the prisoner's disappearance, something unspoken coiled through the ranks of the Dominion like smoke slipping beneath iron doors. It began in small, nearly invisible ways. A guard hesitating a heartbeat too long before carrying out an execution order. A junior officer quietly ignoring a command to burn a village suspected of hiding rebels. A squadron failing to report an intercepted distress call from the frontier. Word of the human prisoner, his calm defiance, his unsettling questions, and his impossible escape spread far beyond the fortress where he'd been held. Soldiers stationed on distant moons and blockade fleets heard fragments of the tale, distorted and retold by hushed voices in mess halls and behind barracks walls. To some, it sounded like a myth. To others, it felt like permission to question orders that had always seemed unbreakable. Battalions sent to reinforce the front lines arrived late, or sometimes not at all. Supply convoys vanished, either ambushed by emboldened rebels or quietly diverted by commanders no longer willing to enforce cruel policies. Entire regiments began to see themselves reflected in the humans' quiet resistance. Not conquerors, but tools wielded by fearful masters. Veterans who had once preached obedience now spoke softly of regret, their eyes shadowed by memories of cities burned and prisoners dragged away in chains. Slowly, the Dominion's aura of invincibility, built over generations through fear and brutality, started to crack. The shining banners once raised high in triumph now hung limp and stained with ash. Fortress walls that had repelled countless assaults trembled under the weight of silence within, as the true battle shifted from without to within the hearts of those cycles who kept turned to decades, and the roar of war faded into the quiet hum of marketplaces rebuilt atop old battlegrounds. My scales, once burnished bronze, dulled and cracked with age, and the heavy weight of command gave way to the gentler burden of memory. I found myself standing before gatherings of younglings, their eyes bright with the same naive certainty I once carried into battle, and I told them not the stories carved into the Dominion's monuments, but the truths that had haunted me ever since. I spoke of the day we brought in a lone human prisoner, his wrists raw from chains, yet his gaze steady and unbroken. I described how, without raising a single weapon, he planted questions in hearts that had known only fear-fed loyalty. Questions about mercy, justice, and the brittle nature of power propped up by cruelty alone. I explained that it was not human fleets that broke the Dominion's walls, nor their soldiers' strength alone that scattered our armies. It was the quiet moment a guard hesitated to carry out a brutal order, the whisper shared between comrades in the shadows, the shame that spread faster than rebellion ever could. The prisoner's calm defiance became a mirror, reflecting the rot we had refused to see, an empire so afraid of weakness that it could not recognize its own. In the lines etched across my aging scales, I carried the memory of that truth. How fear forged iron chains, but courage, silent, steadfast, and seen by just enough hearts, could shatter them without a single blade drawn. And so I spoke of the fall not as a defeat inflicted by an enemy, but as an awakening we had long delayed, brought forth by a single man who refused to bow even when the weight of an empire pressed down upon him. It was never the force of human armies or the brilliance of their tactics that shattered the Dominion's iron grip. It was the silent defiance of a single prisoner, one man who, in chains and under threat of death, chose not to scream or kneel, but to look his captors in the eye and quietly refuse to break. His calm, unshaken gaze reflected a truth we had buried beneath banners and blood, that power built solely on fear cannot hold forever. Through him, doubt spread like a quiet ember through our proud ranks, igniting shame where once there was only blind loyalty. In those unspoken moments of hesitation, when soldiers questioned orders, when officers weighed cruelty against conscience, the foundation of the Dominion began to crumble. It was not the might of enemy fleets that toppled our towers, but the slow collapse from within, sparked by a man who revealed that even the strongest empire is nothing if it forgets mercy and justice. As I speak of him now, in the fading years of my life, I no longer see him merely as an enemy or a symbol of our defeat. I see him as the catalyst who forced us to see the truth of what we had become. And in that moment of seeing, we destroyed ourselves. The fall of the Dominion began not with war cries or invasions, but with a prisoner's silent courage and the quiet, unstoppable power of a single human heart that refused to yield.